There we go. Come on. All right. Hooray. Okay. It's all good. Sorry for starting a little tiny bit late there. I was having a sneezing fit. I'm a coughing, sneezing fit. I had to run upstairs and get something to drink. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. My name's Tad Williams. I'm a writer, and I am a reader. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read some stuff I wrote, which of course I've been doing for quite a while. Anyway, so just let me quickly say hello to the folks who've already showed up. Mahmoud, good to see you, buddy. Emily, hello, Emily. Hello, Cliff. And Kenneth, hi, Cliff. Hi, Kenneth. Becca, hi, Becca. Nancy, hi. Claudia, your last name looks like a Scythy name with that little apostrophe in there. Barb Ann, good evening. Annie, hello, lovely to see you. Don, good evening to you, sir. Pierre, hello, Pierre. You have the coolest name. Is that an online name, or is that your actual middle name? Like my middle name is Danger. Either way, it's still cool. So, Sherry, hi, Sherry. Long time no see. Hi, Jeremy. Oh, you saw my T-shirt. Yes, I know. Did you see the rest of my T-shirt? Jeremy is mentioning that he worked at Pally. So here, did you see the rest of mine? That's what it says, Palo Alto High School. I didn't actually drop out of Palo Alto High School, but my friend Rick, another Palo Alto High graduate, gave it to me. Hello, Carl. How are you? And Kim. Hi, Kim. Hello from Eugene. Oh, I like Eugene. I hope if you live in Eugene, you know my good friend Nina Kariki Hoffman, who lives there as well. Nina's a fabulous person, and it's actually been years since I've been in Eugene, but the last time I was there, Nina took me to I think it was the 4th of July parade, and it was just lovely. It was just everything a 4th of July parade should be, and I will always remember that with extreme fondness. Melissa, hi, Melissa. And hello, John. Good evening to you, too. Anyway, again, excuse me. This always happens. Perhaps it's because I'm down in my office, but since because of the microphone, I'm not running like the little air filter thing that I oftentimes am using down here, and so all of a sudden the cat dander is flying up my nose or something, but it seems to be a fairly frequent state of affairs. Anyway, however, we will survive. And if I have to stop briefly and, I don't know, do something weird, that's okay too. Like blow my nose or something like that. Because this is, as you have guessed, a fairly informal process, as most of my processes are, because I'm an informal kind of guy. Part of it is just because I don't like to make things super fancy special and set up barriers and all that, but also just because I'm lazy and disorganized, at least when it comes to my daily life. I am not lazy and disorganized when it comes to books, obviously, or I'd be writing shorter books with fewer characters. Anyway, what else do I have to mention? Nothing much. Those of you who were here last night, or 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, my time here, no, there really wasn't a huge amount to report this week. We are still just in pandemic lockdown. We are still taking care to avoid infecting ourselves and thereby, I suppose, avoiding infecting other people as well. And hello, Michael. Good to see you. And as a result, not a whole lot to talk about. Just hunker down, just working. I'm working on Navigator's Children again. Brothers of the Wind has wended its way, wint its way. I don't know. Anyway, it has wended. It is went to my publishers, and so the next process is going to be getting that ready and into page proofs for what apparently now is a November publication. I am told. I cannot swear, but that is what I am told is November publication. As you may have guessed, in the publishing industry, things are in a bit of kind of a crazy mix right at the moment because of all of the changes, and especially because of COVID. But then on top of that, my own publishers have recently been they've been chomped up by yet another large publisher, and so they are becoming an even more massive publisher, which will have knock-on effects for many writers, I'm sure, and many others. So that's why if I sound a bit uncertain at times about what's going on, part of it is because I'm just kind of a dipstick in general, but also because things are literally unclear much of the time these days. So, but whatever happens, I know the folks at DAW are going to be getting the book out fairly soon, because they were telling me, get us the book so we can get it out fairly soon. So that's what's going on. Medardo Landon Mazadueñas. Hello, sir. Always good to see you. Always a pleasure, Medardo. Okay, so anything else? I don't think there is. I think I can just sort of jump into the writing here. I don't seem to be sneezing at the moment. But, who knows? That may be an excitement that we all still have to look forward to. That's kind of how it is these days. I took the dog out for a walk. That's like, in and of itself, I was astounded. Wow, there's still a world out here, and look, there's people walking around, and amazing, because sometimes you feel like you're in, what is the Richard Matheson story, I Am Legend, where his protagonist is the last non-vampire left on Earth. There are times, not that I think all my neighbors are vampires or anything, but there's certainly times at the moment where you begin to wonder if the world continues to go on outdoors when you spend as much time shut in. Anyway, so we are reading still from War of the Flowers, which we are now, as you can see, we are substantially through. We're getting to the nitty-gritty here. And at this moment, Theo, along with Cumber Sedge, have decided that the only hope they have for getting Applecore, who they are both very fond of, Theo because he's very fond of her, but also because she saved his life several times. Cumber appears to have a slightly different kind of a like for Applecore. Anyway, they can't. There's no way that in the course of the revolution that the Goblin Mudbug Button is running, that they're going to be able to get Applecore free because she's being held in a jar on the bad guy Hellebor's desk. So they have decided to go to talk to the infamous remover of inconvenient obstacles in hopes of getting some help. So that's what they've done. They've set out before dawn in a boat. Coathook the Goblin has dropped them off, and they have just entered this long windowless warehouse where the remover of inconvenient obstacles is supposed to live and work, and that's where they are. So the last paragraph I read was, before he could touch it, the door silently swung open. Theo gasped and jumped back, half expecting something slimy and otherworldly to stretch a tentacle out of the darkness and yank him in, but no such appendage appeared. The door remained open. The darkness beyond remained impenetrable. Whoever, whatever, they must know we're here. No use trying to sneak up on them. Still, he didn't feel like shouting, "Hello!" either. "Do we have a light?" he whispered. Cumber, bug-eyed and unable to look away from that dark opening, shook his head several times before he realized what Theo had asked and turned the headshake into a nod. He fumbled out a small witchlight sphere, like the one he had produced in the underground garage. He ran his thumb across it, and passed it to Theo as it bloomed into a swampy glow. As Theo stepped through the door, the first thing he noticed was that the glow didn't seem to go very far, that it showed him his own legs and arms, and a suggestion of a flat vertical surface beside him that might be a wall, but did not illuminate the greater darkness. All he could see for certain was that the dark carpeted floor seemed to go on for some distance. He was also aware, he couldn't have missed it, of a powerful, unpleasant smell. The sour, sweet odor was frighteningly similar to the thing that had found him 3 different times in 3 different rotting bodies. But after a moment he realized this smell was more complicated, a combination of scents that had putrefaction in it, but also strange, sweet spices and the vigorous essence of growing things. The smell of a fistful of wet mud and spring grass bumping improbably against the reek of burning sulfur, of whiskey and cinnamon and excrement and other far less recognizable things, all jumbled together until it made his eyes water. Strange as it was, he couldn't really waste time considering it, not with his heart thumping like some insanely overhyped click track as he edged forward through the near darkness, brandishing what he was beginning to think was a faulty witchlight. He reached out toward the spot where it looked like there might be a wall, and was relieved to find something cool, hard, and ever so slightly damp. He slid his foot forward and found that the solid floor continued. He bent, holding the globe at the height of his shoe tops, and suddenly the hallway began to grow brighter. "Theo!" "Shh!" It happened quickly, but smoothly, and had nothing whatsoever to do with the witchlight in his hand. Within a few moments he could see that they were standing at one end of a long hallway, with matte black walls on both sides and a carpet of the same shade beneath their feet. At the far end, basking in a little directionless glow of its own, a door with a golden nameplate waited. "I wonder whose name is on that?" But it was only a tiny flick of curiosity in the midst of dread, like a bird flying just ahead of a storm. He looked at Cumber. Cumber looked back. It was pretty clear to Theo that if either one of them suggested turning around instead of walking down that long, black hallway toward the door, the other would agree. Apple core, he reminded himself. Apple core, with that corkscrew, fighting with that thing to help someone she didn't even know. Despite the carpet, which all but silenced their footfalls, by the time they reached the door, Theo felt like they were walking across bubble wrap in stone shoes, each step excruciatingly loud. The weird odors were making him lightheaded, but instead of reducing his inhibitions, it made him feel like the worst sort of stone, paranoid teenager stuck at a stoplight next to a cop car. The nameplate had the word "Enter" scratched on it in a crude, almost childish hand. As he watched, the word ran off the golden rectangle like water. A moment later, the word "push" appeared in its place. Is that somebody's little joke? Anger gave back a little of his bravery, although it was stretched thinly over a great deal of raw terror. He reached out and shoved the door open, then stepped through. The room beyond was completely unexpected after the featureless hallway. Jumbled mountains of objects stretched yards above his head on all sides, thousands of unfathomable things scattered seemingly at random, as if someone had crashed an old-fashioned pharmacy into a particularly disturbing toy shop at high speed, then liberally sprinkled the wreckage with the contents of the Library of Alexandria. Pinkish purple dawn light streamed down from oblong windows high above, illuminating the piles so that it all looked a bit like a stage set or a Disneyland ride. Dazzled and overwhelmed, Theo did not notice the massive figure in the shadows behind him until it reached an arm around his chest and immobilized him, then pinioned his head with its other huge hand. The arm across his torso was so tight that after he let out his breath in a panicked gust, he could get no air back in again. He was lifted up until he dangled helplessly above the floor, struggling unsuccessfully to breathe. Sparks danced before his eyes. Everything turned red, then black. Even though someone was speaking to him, he was not at first aware that he was awake, or where he was, or even precisely who he was. The voice itself was a strange thing, insubstantial as wind stirring a pile of leaves, but oddly loud, as though the person speaking might be small enough to sit inside his ear. "Your pardon," the breathy voice was saying. "They are not very subtle, I'm afraid. You are awake, aren't you?" Memory came back, and with it a quickening of his heart, which did not help his pounding head any. "Not good. Something not good happening." Theo was lying on the floor. Cumber lay beside him, arms at his side like a toy put neatly back in its box. His face covered by a semi-transparent membrane, so unexpected and baffling that for a wretched second Theo thought the Ferrisher had been skinned. "Don't worry. He's not dead," the invisible presence explained. "It's a call. He's sleeping. I wanted to speak to you alone." Theo got up into a crouch, looking from side to side, trying to discover the source of the voice. "I'm in the room with you," his captor told him. "But you really don't want to see me. You'll be happier where you are." Theo pretended to look for the remover, if that was indeed who the speaker was, but meanwhile he was getting his feet under him, unobtrusively balancing himself to move quickly. Half his mind was screaming at him just to run for the door and keep running. Cumber, Sedge, and even Applecore be damned. But he was also wondering how far and how fast he could drag the unconscious Ferrisher and what it was that had manhandled them so easily in the first place. He turned and grabbed at Cumber, but no sooner did his fingers touch his companion's clothes than a pair of pale shapes, almost as big as ogres, but much stiffer in their movements, stepped out of the shadows near the doorway. Theo froze as the things walked slowly toward him and stopped a few yards away. They looked like living statues, crude ones at that, their features barely defined in the chalky white flesh. The eyes, black dots that he recognized a startled moment later, were nothing more than holes punched into the heavy, dead faces. "Please," the voice said, "do not challenge them. They are not very subtle, the Mandragora, and I would prefer not to have to wait for you to regain consciousness again." Mandragora? The twinned faces stared at him, unmoving, impassive. They might have just arrived from their perches atop the cliffs of Easter Island. "Children of the Mandrake. Each slave has been carved from one of the great roots. Very time-consuming, actually, and finding the roots is a long and boring and dangerous process. But once you've got them, they're very useful, incredibly strong, and about as much sensitivity to pain as a steam locomotive. But, as I said, not extremely good with more complicated tasks, like grappling someone without crushing them to death. I truly did not wish them to be so rough with you." "I've seen one of these before." Theo slowly disentangled his hand from Cumber's coat. Keep the remover talking. That seemed to be the best bet right now. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe he treated all his guests this way. There was one in Daffodil House, just before... Yes. The remover actually sounded a little regretful. A waste of a great root, and really for no purpose except to allow hellebore to gloat. You know about that? He suddenly realized that not only was he helpless, this person, whoever he was, might be more of an ally of the hellebore faction than Button or Primrose had known. He might already have contacted them. Did you do it? Did you help them do that? The remover did not sound overly disturbed. The dragons, you mean? No. Nidris Hellebore is quite capable of thinking up something like that on his own. Oh, yes, he certainly is. His voice had an odd note in it. Theo looked around the room again and saw that the shadows seemed darker in the room's north corner. He even thought he saw a little movement. The remover must be sitting there watching him from the depths of that insane clutter, like a dragon crouched on its hoard. What are you going to do with me? To his surprise, the remover laughed. Not an arch villain's chortle, but an honest wheeze of near breathless amusement. You know, I can't really say, at least not in the short term. In the long term, well, I'll explain, but at the moment, I'm just trying to appreciate the irony. Irony? It seemed he was going to be allowed to survive for at least another few minutes. Theo began surreptitiously to examine his surroundings. Now that his eyes were adjusting to the dim light, he was even more certain that he had discerned the remover's position. Far back in the corner, half hidden by a ring of draped statuary, was something that looked a bit like a high-backed chair occupied by a very complicated shadow. Theo took a step toward it. Don't! The voice said. I told you, you will not like what you see. I've seen all kinds of shit since I've been here. How much worse can it be? You'd be surprised, the voice told him. Besides, it is not entirely your feelings I am concerned with. I am ashamed of what I have become. Theo retreated a few steps. What little he could see of the thing in the chair was certainly unsettling, a suggestion of stick-like limbs, but also of membranous folds and glistening wetness. Okay, you said irony? Yes. It is ironic that I expended so much effort to bring you to me, and failed so completely, and yet here you are in my place of business, voluntarily. Again came the whispering laugh. What do you mean? The era that I sent to capture you, that one that is still no doubt hunting you. Do you have any idea what sort of energy it costs to summon such a thing out of the old dead places, and what mostly forgotten skills are necessary to keep it in the breathing world for such a long time? You sent that thing after me? His panic, which had eased for a moment, came rushing back like a fever chill. Then you are working for Hellebore. So all this had been for nothing. Not only hadn't he found a way to free Applecore, he had saved the bad guys the trouble of waiting until he reached Hellebore House. God, I really am an idiot. Perhaps. But it's a bit more complicated than that. I had hoped for just this chance, the chance to have you to myself. The era is a creature of instincts, but it is compelled by the summoning. In this case, it's compelled to do only one thing, to seize you and bring you here, to this place so you can turn me over to Hellebore, get the credit, earn a tidy little commission. Theo looked over to where Cumber lay on the floor, caul-faced, his chest moving shallowly. You bastard. I should make you kill me, or make your big old root monsters kill me. Better than letting Hellebore and Thornapple get their hands on me. A thought wiggled up through the anger and fear. But I'll make a bargain with you. Let him go. He pointed to Cumber. They don't care about him. Let him go, and I'll let them take me quietly. Interesting. The tone was flat. You would do that for a friend. What they plan for you is terrible, you know, and not just for you. Theo suddenly recalled Lord Hollyhock's speculations on the afternoon that Daffodil House burned. You're talking about Old Night, aren't you? What they're planning to do to the rest of the mortal world, some kind of black magic tidal wave? And even as he said it, Theo realized that he could not afford to sacrifice himself for Cumber Sedge, for Applecore, for anyone. He had no idea what he was supposed to know, but he could not take the risk. He turned abruptly and bolted for the door. It was a near miss, or seemed to be. Even as his fingers brushed the latch, a huge, doughy hand curled in the back of his shirt, which tore at the seams, but held long enough for the thing to enfold him in its grip. He kicked and fought, trying to reach the Mandragoram's face with his free hand, to scratch at its eyes and enrage it. He knew it might be his last moment, that he was choosing suicide over being made a tool of the Hellebore faction. But although he sunk his nails deep into the thing's sockets, there was nothing there to injure. The damp, fibrous substance just scraped away and spattered down his wrists. The thing pulled him in, wrapped him in its massive arms, held him fast. Theo's eyes were blurred with tears of rage and desperation. "Fuck you!" he screamed at the Watcher in the shadows. "If you won't kill me, I'll make them do it. I won't give them what they want." "You would not keep that promise very long once they began to work on you," said the dry voice. "But you misunderstand me. The Ira was summoned to bring you to me first, not so I could earn Hellebore's commission, but so I can have my own conversation with you. Nidris Hellebore is not the only one who has waited a long time to gain his heart's desire. You see, I too need your help." "Help you? You must be joking. I'll die first. You might as well start with the thumbscrews." But it was false, hollow. He knew that even the strongest, most iron-willed people could succumb to torture, and he wasn't one of those. His only hope was to keep this remover thing talking and pray for a better chance to escape. He remembered Poppy's phone, and for a moment wondered if he could pretend to be more compliant, then find a chance to signal her with it somehow. But what could she do? Drive here with her school chum? He had already failed his other two closest friends, Cumber and Applecore. He couldn't drag Poppy into this as well. "So you're double-crossing Hellebore," he said. "So you've found some other client who will pay more for whatever it is I'm supposed to know?" "I am truly sorry that it has come to this, Theo. I already have enough on my conscience with the suffering I have brought to you and yours. But my need is very great." "Conscience? Fairies don't have goddamn consciences. All of you people, you're the most self-centered creatures I've ever heard of. Even Hitler wouldn't do what Hellebore wants to do, destroy an entire world just to keep himself in power." "I rather suspect he would have, if he'd had the chance," the remover said. "But in any case, your accusation isn't entirely fair. You see, I'm not a fairy, or at least not really." "So what are you? A monster, obviously. Whether I am a monster is open to debate, but I am even less of this world than you are. Theo's terror had turned into a thick, queasy heaviness. I don't care. I don't give a damn about your problems or your riddles. I had hoped this would go better, the voice in the shadow said after a long pause. Perhaps I have done a poor job of presenting things. When I anticipated this day, I felt sure we could find some way to speak to each other, since we have so much in common. So much in common? Are you joking? You're a thing, a murderer, a mercenary kidnapper. You're a traitor even to the bastards who hired you. All those things are probably true, Theo. But I am also the closest thing you have to family, and I had hoped we would be able to speak to each other in a civil way. What are you talking about? The remover cleared his throat with a noise like newspapers blowing in an alleyway. I used to be Eamon Dowd. Chapter 36, Changelings. That's a lie! You're dead! Theo realized what he had just said a moment later. I mean, Eamon Dowd is dead! In a way, yes. In a way, no. The thing in the shadows shifted itself with a noise halfway between a rustle and a squelch. Believe me, Theo, this is not the way I imagined it. I had hoped our first conversation could be a bit more familial. See here, if I tell the Mandragorum to let you go, will you promise not to try to escape until you hear what I have to say? It won't do you any good anyway. You've seen how fast and strong they are. Theo wondered why the thing would make such a claim. It didn't seem possible. Life in fairyland was strange, but surely not that strange. But it couldn't hurt to play for time. All right, tell it to quit breaking my ribs. I'll stay put. The root slave, responding to some silent command, set him down and then moved quietly back toward the wall to stand next to its twin. Okay, look, whoever you are, you can't be Eamon Dowd. For one thing, everyone here says the remover is very old, ancient, that he's been around longer than anyone can remember. And so he has, or at least he had been, before I took his place. In fact, I've often wondered if it was possible that the remover I ousted had once replaced an earlier version. Perhaps the role of remover is more title than name, and each one who holds that title eventually has it taken away from him by a younger contender, as it were. The sad, dry chuckle issued from nowhere and everywhere. If so, it's a dubious prize, believe me. Go ahead, say what you need to say, but I'll only listen if you promise to let my friend go. The Farisher. I have no interest in him. I certainly don't want to harm him. But it's in my interest to keep you calm and keep you here. So for now, he will remain sleeping peacefully on the floor. Why don't you show yourself? I don't like talking to the air. Do not presume too much, Theo. You're not in a position to dictate to me, even if I have a certain family feeling toward you. As I said, I am ashamed of how I look, so keep your distance. I can put on a slightly less disturbing form when I go out into the city. Nothing pleasant, but with a long coat and hat on, I do not attract too much attention if I keep to shadows and back entrances. However, putting on that semblance takes a great deal of energy, a great deal, and I'm very tired today. It's been a busy week. The thing rustled again, I suppose I can't blame you for doubting me. If you want me to believe you, then prove it. Tell me something only Eamon Dowd would know. Now, there's an old chestnut, right out of some radio play, it sounds like. What might such a private something be, Theo? It's not as if I shared your childhood, came to visit you like an ordinary great uncle, brought you sweets and comic books, and exchanged little secrets that we could recall together now. Shall I tell you something written in the notebook? It would prove very little, since I know others beside you have had it, including, if I am correct, your Farisher friend lying there. The remover seemed to consider. What else would prove it to you? Shall I list the presidents, Washington to Nixon? That's all I know. I'm a bit blank on American history after the early 1970s, which is understandable when you remember where I've been. Or should we stick with the personal? Do you want me to tell you what was in the letter I sent to your mother, or at least to the woman you thought was your mother? You are eventually going to hear something of why I apologized to her, whether you wish to or not. He did not want it to be true. But Eamon Dowd died. I read his obituary. You read an obituary written after Eamon Dowd's body was discovered. Yes, that particular physical envelope is definitely dead now, dust or near dust. Do you think if I still had it available to me, however old and infirm, I would choose to live like this, hiding in the shadows, solitary as a spider, so terrifying that even the children of trolls and goblins run from me, shrieking? For the first time, Theo could hear pain in the voice, real and powerful. But maybe he's just a good actor. They're tricky, these fairies. Who knows what one of them might do to weasel answers out of me, if what I know is really so damn important? Just keep talking. I presume you read the notebook, so I won't bother to reiterate the early part of my story. I came here to New Erewhon and grew attached to the place. I made a sort of life for myself, all well and good, and no different than the story of many other mortals who found their way to Fairy and then never wanted to leave again. I even fell in love. Ah, I see that you know something about that. You have heard the gossip, perhaps, or the propaganda of her family, the lies of the Primrose clan, because that is who I fell in love with. Arifine Primrose, youngest daughter of that great house. They say you kidnapped her. Whether the story was true or not seemed to make little difference just now. Theo needed his invisible captor to go on talking until he figured out how to free himself. Even if this thing was somehow what was left of his great uncle, he had all but admitted he was working for Hellebore. Still, Theo's earlier certainty that the remover was lying about his true identity was definitely weakening. They say that, do they? That I kidnapped her. Well, they're right, up to a point. But I am not ready to tell that part of the story yet. Trust me, Theo, if you are patient, the whole sordid, wretched mess will come out. Go on. He stole a glance at Cumber. The film over his face obscured his features, but his chest was still moving regularly. Would he never wake up as long as that call thing was on him? What if you had to perform some fairy magic to get it off? It would be hard enough to escape the two swift and powerful root slaves on his own, let alone while carrying the dead weight of Cumber Sedge. I met her at one of Tertius Stock's house parties. She thought I was an amusing freak, at first, but I waited her out as patiently as one of her own kind, because she was. He made a kind of strangled noise, anger or grief. No, there is no use telling you what I felt for Arifine or trying to describe our time together. If you have been in love that way, you know. If you haven't, no words will make it sound like anything but madness. When her family browbeat Parliament into doing what they wanted, the Primroses were one of the 7 families, you know, the lords of New Erewhon. And my banishment was proclaimed. My life was effectively over. They would have done me a kindness simply to kill me. As it turns out, they would have done themselves a kindness as well. A sudden icy edge in the remover's voice brought up goose pimples on Theo's skin. Instead, I was cast out of the Garden of Eden and back into the world of mortals, alone, miserable. No, more than miserable, bereft, insane with grief. See? You can't be Eamon Dowd because you've got the details wrong. Dowd never left this world. Primrose told me that his sister was kidnapped after Dowd's banishment was supposed to have gone down. So he dodged it somehow. If there's one thing everyone knows for certain, it's that, what's it called, Clover effect. No one can come back here, leave, and then come back again. So if you say you did, you're not him. Quid pro quo. The dry laugh gusted through the room again, but there wasn't much mirth in it. What you want to say is QED, quod erat demonstrandum, to be demonstrated, not quid pro quo, which basically means tit for tat. Theo was far too frightened and angry to be embarrassed. So sue me. You know what I mean. You say you went to the mortal world, but Eamon Dowd couldn't have done that. Theo. He could almost imagine the thing in the dark corner shaking its head, although he saw no motion in the shadows to indicate it. Don't wave the Clover effect at me, of all people. What you don't know about the way fairy works. In fact, what most of the fairies themselves don't know about it is staggering to contemplate. So why don't you shut your mouth for a while and listen? I was sentenced to banishment. I was going to be forcefully removed from New Erewhon. There were 3 days of legal formality before the banishment took effect. These flower fairies are as bad as the British, or even the Russian apparatchiks, when it comes to meaningless paper stamping and standing in line for no good reason. Arifine had been taken away from me and hauled back to her family's country house, which was more or less a fortress. I knew that I could not reach her there without being killed, and yet I honestly thought about it, considered whether dying on her lawn might not be a better choice than simply letting her family and their tame members in Parliament boot me out. I was not a well man, Theo. I loved her. I would have sold my immortal soul without a moment's thought to be with her. Oh, my God. Theo's skin was tingling, and something tightened inside his gut until he felt quite ill. Oh, my God, you really are him. You really are Eamon Dowd. I knew that already, the remover said. Why do you suddenly believe me? On top of all the other things, it was the way you just said you'd have sold your soul, the way a person would, an ordinary human person, even if they didn't believe they had one. The human-type fairies don't think about souls, any of that stuff. It's not just that they don't believe in them, they don't even seem to have considered it. The few times I've asked about it, it was like I'd asked them if they thought they had tentacles, something anyone could see they didn't have. Actually, some of the fairy folk do have tentacles. You should see some of the deep-sea nixies. Even if you start out looking more or less like a human here, this is a Lamarckian world, and a couple of thousand years of intense pressure will do funny things to you. Okay, you win. You really are my great uncle. I don't need to hear the whole story. I need to help my friend Applecore. And this friend here, he pointed at Cumber. So what are you going to do? Help me? Or sell me to those murdering creeps, Hellebore and Thornapple? I told you, you must listen to... No! I have responsibilities. There was a long silence. When Dowd broke it, his voice had taken on a new quality, cold and precise, which Theo had not heard and didn't much like. You are not to interrupt me, whatever claims you may have on my conscience. I have waited a long time, and the situation is complicated. I will tell you my story. But I will tell you my story. After that, we will see what is to be done. Theo lowered his head. He might not be related by actual blood to this man, but even with no more of him to judge from than his voice, Theo could recognize a family resemblance to his mother, that chilly disaffection that could sweep down suddenly in the middle of an apparently insignificant argument, transmuting it to something painful, and against which there was no more sense arguing than there was value in waving your arms at a hurricane to turn it aside. So, talk, he said at last. Very well. The chill abated a little. As I said, Theo, I was desperate. I was a condemned man waiting for something I feared more than death. Not merely being sent away from the woman I loved, but being sent across a barrier that I could never cross again. I had appealed to the few allies I had among the high houses, stocks, violets, daffodils, but none of them were willing to support me against Parliament, and especially against the Primroses, who were frequently allies of theirs in the fierce struggles among the highest houses for dominance. The Flower War that until recently everyone called the last Flower War was just beginning, so allegiances were even more delicate and crucially important. In fact, things had grown worse than I knew, as I found out later. So I turned instead to the only person I had heard of who might know more about that barrier than the 7 families and their tame wizards, or scientists, as they are called here. The day before the banishment was to be carried out, I went to the one known as the remover of inconvenient obstacles. Yes, I came here, to this desolate place, just as you did, and probably feeling many of the same things. Terror, hopelessness, rage over what had been done to me and those I loved. I was desperate. I was willing to do anything. The old remover was a creature of infinite subtlety and malice, but he never bothered to waste his energies against those who had done him no personal harm, unless he stood to gain something for their suffering. So I was safe enough, at least at first. Still, he liked to be entertained, so he let me wander for hours in the maze outside this room before he let me in. I didn't see a maze. No, you didn't. And he was also less reticent than I am about showing himself to supplicants. When I was finally admitted into his presence, it was all I could do not to run away again. But my need was greater than any horror or nausea, and I forced myself to look at him as I begged for his assistance. I told him that I would pay nearly any price for it. He could help me, he said at last, But he needed something from me in return, a mortal child to give to one of the most powerful families who had developed a sudden and serious need for one. Even in my madness and despair, I was not so far gone that I was willing to give an infant up to torture or murder. So I demanded to know the purpose and who would get the child. He would not reveal which house, but he swore, invoking certain powers in whose names it is a very bad idea to swear falsely, as he and I knew, that the child would be treated as a member of that family and raised by them, that no hurt would be done to it. This was true, it turned out, but in a rather horrid way. Theo suddenly thought he felt things fitting together. Was that me? Is that what you did? Why you apologized to my mother in that letter? But somehow the details remained confusingly long. Good Lord, Dowd said in disgust. I can understand not knowing QED, but can you not use logic at all? What have they done to the schools since I was a boy? The dark shape rustled and twitched in the corner shadows. Despite the weirdness of the setting, the life or death matters, Theo had a momentary taste of what it would have been like to grow up with a cross old great-uncle. Think, boy, if you were a mortal child taken from your parents and brought here, then how did you wind up spending your entire life until now in the mortal world? How would that make sense? All right, I didn't work it through. But this does have something to do with me, doesn't it? Of course it does, if you'll let me tell it without interrupting. Dowd took a moment to reorder his thoughts. So the remover made a bargain with me. Swearing by the same oaths he used to proclaim the safety of the child I would steal, he promised that if I would secure a mortal child for him before the first sunrise after my return, he would help to bring me back to Fairy, despite the Clover effect, something that no one but the remover himself even thought possible. There was more to his scheme, of course, but I hadn't learned that yet. So I went away from this place on my last night in Fairy, still miserable, still almost mad with grief, really, but also with a little hope that I might not be separated from my beloved Eraphine forever. I returned to my house in forenoon to pack up those few things I planned to take back with me. You mean you can, take a suitcase when you leave Fairy? Again, Dowd did not bother to hide his irritation. Did the person who went to your world to fetch you arrive naked? Didn't you yourself bring my notebook and whatever you were wearing when you came through? Of course you can take things. Not everything will remain what it seems to be once it leaves Fairy, of course. The legends of what happens to Fairy Gold are common enough that even your television-dulled generation has probably heard them. But I was certainly able to take a few keepsakes. His voice calmed, but still remained chilly. Now, where was I? Yes, so I went to my house to pack up. I had made my devil's bargain with the remover. I would give him a child, a mortal child, and in return, he would help me return to Fairy in secret. That's still a horrible thing, Theo said, despite his own determination not to interrupt again. What is? Stealing a child, even when I was promised that the child would be raised as a member of one of the high families, that it would want for nothing. That's fine for the child, but what about the baby's parents, its real parents? That would ruin their lives, having their baby disappear. A long moment passed. To Theo's surprise, when Dowd spoke again, there was no anger left, nothing but a bleak emptiness. Of course. And I knew that. Knew also that on such short notice I would have little chance to find a child who deserved to be saved, one whose parents were bullying monsters or drunkards or drug addicts. Little chance to salve my conscience by stealing a child whose parents, I could tell myself, deserved it. So as I prepared to leave New Erewhon, I was on the horns of a terrible dilemma. If the remover was wrong or lying, I would never see my love Arafine again. If he was right, I would regain what I had lost only by inflicting a dreadful loss on someone else. You shouldn't have agreed to it, Theo thought, but did not say. There are some bargains you just can't make. But he still felt a kind of pity for the thing that had been Eamon Dowd. He had been hammered by love a few times himself, badly enough that he had done some really idiotic things. He had slept in his car outside one ex-girlfriend's house 3 freezing nights in a row, just so he could torture himself by watching her go in and out with her new boyfriend, compelled against all sense to make himself miserable imagining what they were doing in bed together just inside. He certainly understood being violently, almost criminally love-stupid. But there are still limits, he thought. There have to be limits. As it turned out, the old remover was far more subtle than I understood. Dowd went on, his whispery voice distant with what might have been grief. He had many projects in hand and was not going to squander such an opportunity on just one. That very night, as I lay sleepless on my bed, someone knocked at my door. It was a uniformed Dooney. You must have met a few of them by now, and he told me I was to accompany him. I was confused, but because I thought it might be something the remover had arranged to help accomplish our plot, or that the Dooney might even have been sent to bring me back here to the remover's house, I dressed and got into the huge black luxury coach, and we spread across New Erewhon. We didn't go all the way to the waterfront, but toward the center of town instead, into eventide. It was only when we suddenly turned in at one of its back entrances that I understood that for some reason I had been summoned to Violet House. I had been there before. The Violets were among the families who were, if not friendly to mortals, reasonably tolerant of them. As the bodyguards carefully searched me, before allowing me out of the garage and into the main house, I began to realize for the first time how bad things had gotten between the highest flower houses just during the months of my downfall and my trial in Parliament, when I had been largely oblivious to other events. There were soldiers everywhere in the compound, a private army, and they were all busy. The house seemed to be preparing for some kind of imminent assault, maybe even a full-blown war. Actually, as I found out later, they were preparing for what would happen when they lost that war. The Dooney chauffeur was left behind, and a young, high-handed fairy of the Violet clan inner circle took charge of me with as much enthusiasm as if I were a basket of dirty linen, hurrying me into the heart of the house. I was searched one more time by a quartet of ogre guards, then ushered into the house library. Beleus Violet, the head of the family, was waiting there for me. I could probably best describe him if I tell you that he was something like the head of a wealthy old New England family. Boston Brahmins, as we used to call them. As fairy nobility goes, he was better than most, reasonably fair-minded, no crueler than average. In fact, by the standards of his people, he would have to be called a liberal. This does not mean he treated me well that night. He was angry and heartsick, and it must also have galled him to have to turn in his most desperate need to one such as I, a mortal, an interloper. "You have received a fitting punishment for your presumption, Eamon Dowd," he said to me. "Do not think I feel sympathy for you. But it is not because, as many in the other houses do, I deem my blood above yours, although even among mortals, I understand yours is not particularly distinguished. Rather, I object to what you did, because we of the ruling families constitute the thin walls that separate our world from the barbarous old days, and we simply cannot afford to let ourselves be diluted with mortal ideas. Our daughters taken as wives by mortals, our houses inherited by them. That may not be what you intended, but I know well how things happen, how one liberty opens the door for the rest. If such a thing came to pass, we would soon be only an adjunct of your world. That cannot be allowed. That's what he said to me, by way of hello. Dowd allowed himself a sour, wheezing chuckle. And remember, he was one of the progressive party. And I think we're going to stop there, even though I could have read for a few more minutes. But the chapter is still a good few pages more. And as one always finds out partway into the process, reading in the Eamon Dowd voice is very tough on the throat. Excuse me. When will I learn to check these things ahead of time? Anyway, yeah, there's about 4 more pages to that chapter, which includes many, many important revelations, but most of them are all read in the voice of Eamon Dowd. And I think I'm hitting the limits of my Dowd vocalization tonight. There's been a few of them like that, but I'd forgotten that one was a whole chapter long almost. Anyway, but as always, I'm very pleased that you came to hang out with me. And as I said, we're getting along here on the book. We've only got this little bit here at the end to read, which is full of wham bam, slang, slam bang, like slang bam actually, slam bang action, and revelations and surprises. So we will continue with those revelations, surprises, and all of that slang bam action next week. In the interim, what is today? Oh, happy Valentine's Day. God, not only did I forget to say that to you guys, but my wife and I forgot to say it to each other, which either shows you how distracted we are or how long we've been married. Or the fact that we never leave the house. That could have something to do with it too. But anyway, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. And those of you who are staying home and under lockdown like we are, please continue to take care of yourselves and your loved ones and your family members and, you know, all of that stuff. And by family, I am one of those people who very much means whatever your family is, however it's put together, whatever the connections are. If it's family, it's family. So take good care of all those people, but also take care of yourself and take care of anybody else around you who might need a little cheering up or anything like that. Excuse me. I'm still coughing little bits of Eamon Dowd out of my lungs here. So I will be back next Sunday. I have no reason to expect to miss anything because I don't think I'm going to go anywhere between now and then except out for an occasional walk with the dogs. Or, things like that, where you have to run out and suddenly buy something to patch something with or whatever. But other than that, I'm home and working. So I think there is every good reason to believe I will be here next Sunday. And at that point, I will greet you all again. And I will thank you again for the pleasure of your company as I am thanking you now. So with that, peace, love, harmony, good stuff of all kinds, confusion to our enemies. And I wish you the very best until we join up again from the Williams Beal Rancho de Quesadilla here in Santa Cruz area. And I will see you next week. So thanks again for joining me. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much. Good night.